How do we tackle, here's the thing, how do we tackle a kind of rise, what you might call a rise in anti-vaxxers? And when I say rise, I mean, you have to be careful with this because we know, like all of these things, we know it's not most people. But a loud voice in this area is incredibly dangerous. I mean, right now, I would say it's an amazing time to be a human being on planet Earth. So we've had a killer pandemic, comes hurtling our way, takes out the lives globally of over 2 million people. But we're gifted because we live in the 21st century where medical and scientific innovation can react in a way that would have been unthinkable even a decade ago. So we now have a vaccine. We now have several vaccines. And as I mentioned before, the UK leading the way in rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine this weekend. As I said, 500,000 people in just one day. So we've got 9 million so far. We are not shy off a quarter of the population having the jab. This is incredible. As I said, this could be, groundbreaking, obviously, but I mean, in terms of where we've been and how we've been affected as a country, this is the much needed light at the end of a very troubling and dark tunnel indeed. Yet, despite this, there are people who still don't believe in the science, the tiny minority who believe in fairy tales. Scrap that, actually, the tiny minority who believe in dangerous and offensive lies. And they're a curious bunch to deal with. Who are these people? Who are they? Whether they're the anti-vaxxers, whether they're the whole anti-COVID thing. We saw the clip of a guy turning up in a hospital. I saw another clip of a man turning up in a shop saying that COVID is now delisted as being dangerous and all this kind of guff that they've got, and they've added 2 and 2 together and made 506 here. Who are these people? I've always sensed that if you look at, in this case, the anti-vaccination lot, there's a kind of commonality among these groups. They invariably come from a sort of curious subset, if you like, often self-defining themselves as outcasts. If you scratch under the surface, you'll usually find a synergy in their backstories. They're often single, not exclusively, but often single. They're usually rudderless. They often have lost something. That could be a relationship or a job or a career or just a general lack of direction. And as we've said many times, the human condition so often dictates the shortest route to an answer. So where there's a vacuum, the busy mechanics of your mind will do its best to fill that vacuum. So if you're feeling a tad lost, if you're seeing a sense of injustice over something, any of the aforementioned, or you simply can't get life into first gear, there's a massive catch-all answer to all of your woes. It's not you, it's the system. The system is wrong. The system is corrupt. The roadmap of life is rigged against you in some shape or form. These people might not say this explicitly. They might not say it out loud, although the likes of David Ickenko do this. But the backdrop of believing meaningless, unproven and wholly invented lies usually only happens when other things in their lives are lacking. It's very rare to meet a tinfoil hat merchant who's got all their ducks in a row. Have you noticed that? You don't tend to meet many of these people who are without some kind of agitation in their own story. Now, it sounds like I'm sympathising. I'm not sympathising with these people because at best they're idiots and at worst they're dangerous. Because these are people whose lives just haven't panned out how they would have liked it. Most of them should know better. Humans like to explain away their shortcomings, and this is their way of doing it. And it's dangerous stuff, and it becomes pretty tacky and offensive too. Using imagery, one example of this, using imagery of concentration camps to highlight your anti-vaccination position is horrific. You might have seen there's a specific image. It's a mocked up version of the Evening Standard that shows what is clearly meant to be Auschwitz to warn against vaccinations, and where it would say work makes you free, which was what was written on the gates of Auschwitz. They've kind of transposed that into vaccines safe path to freedom. Kind of an irony thing, playing on the same point. So a dose of anti-Semitism to advance their lies as well. There's another pamphlet out there doing the rounds at the moment. I don't know if you saw that. I mean, this has got some absolutely incredible stuff on it. And remember, these are grown adults who are telling you this kind of thing. COVID vaccine clinical trials have caused deaths, brain damage and paralysis. They say this on their list. An ex-vice president of Pfizer, you know, that guy, says it's likely to cause infertility in women and more studies need to be done. This vaccine must not be mixed with other medical products. It goes on to talk about how it's changing DNA. Some even argue here that it's putting a tracking code into your body. This is all high-octane, invented guff. These are lies. These are lies. And I mentioned this on the programme last week, that in 1870, I think it was 1870, 1880, an anti-vaccine march in Leicester. 1880. This is how long these nut jobs have been out there. An anti-vaccine march took place in Leicester. So there was the Leicester Anti-Vaccination Organisation, which I think started a few years before. So way back then, 150 years ago, this was against smallpox, by the way, which I understand we've largely cured because of vaccines. These were the same kind of people. They were absolutely incandescent, completely sure of their territory. They had no evidence for this, of course, and these people rarely do have any kind of evidence for what they throw out in these cases. But it's dangerous because it doesn't take much. You only need the odd person who might be a bit susceptible or vulnerable to listen to this and think, well, if I take this, am I going to grow a tail? Am I suddenly going to discover that my DNA is changed? Am I going to die an early death due to some liver damage or neurological breakdown because I had the vaccine? This is all invented nonsense. And yet, if you look at, and I know, again, I put the caveat in every time, social media is not the Oracle of Delphi. It's not where you go. It's not even Wikipedia. And that's not always the best place to go for your information, as I think we all know. But nonetheless, I mean, it's got a loud voice. And when it shouts loudly, there'll be people who get hoovered up into that frenzy, unwittingly or otherwise. Most fascinatingly, when you talk to the kind of the conspiracy lot, and I suppose just to compound this, you also discover that they're a bit like protesters. When you met a lot of the kind of anti-Brexit protesters, I mean, I'm talking about the Remainer extremists. And I remember this on College Green the day after the referendum, back in 2016, that these people are often the same ones that turn up at the Extinction Rebellion protests. They're the same ones that turn up at the anti-capitalist protests. They're the same ones that turn up at the anti-police protests. It's kind of the same central casting with bells on, pitching up at all these. You know, it's a professional agitation issue that some people have. And it's the same with this. You often find that the people that are against the vaccines and the whole COVID story and everything that goes with it, you will also find they sign up and subscribe to a whole bunch of other stuff as well that we won't go over now, but you take my point. So it is dangerous. It is dangerous because these voices are loud and they now have a new mechanism in social media to spread the word. And because of that, it means you don't take them seriously, but you certainly don't ignore when people are wheeling out anti-Semitic tropes in order to advance their mad conspiracy theories. You don't ignore that. You don't ignore it when somebody's putting leaflets through someone's door telling them that if they take the vaccine. Imagine living on your own. You're vulnerable. You're concerned. You're worried about your health. And everybody should ask themselves questions before they have any kind of medication or vaccine. I do that before I take a paracetamol, for goodness sake, and I try and avoid it at all costs. I'd rather not have to put anything into my body if I don't need it. So that's my choice. That's a whole different equation, different ball game, different debate. But there you are on your Todd, and you're worried because you're hearing this, and one of those leaflets turns up in your door. Proclaiming that your DNA will be altered, proclaiming that you might be made sterile as a result of taking it, proclaiming that there's a tracking device put into some of the vaccines that's going to follow you around. They just made it up. How do we tackle the rise of anti-vaxxers? The easiest answer is what most of us do, and we ignore it. If social media didn't exist, by the way, these people would still be around. Reference the aforementioned Leicester 150 years ago. But their voices wouldn't resonate in the same kind of way. Nobody would be even debating some of the characters. And of course, what the other point the anti-vaxxer lot do is they usually find a scientist or a clinician that speaks their language. Because you'll always find one or two. You'll find it in any debate, doesn't matter what it is. And that person's name will be thrown out and used all over the place. Look, he said it. He's an absolute top-notch scientist. He used to work at Pfizer, so it must be true. Yeah, but I would offer you up 5,000 other voices who do this for a living too that don't share his view? What is it about the lone voice that people are comfortable joining in with and quoting and citing? 0344 499 1000. We already live in a world of disinformation. In fact, Paul says, I'm not worried about disinformation. The problem with suppressing this sort of material is that it's now used by the left and social media to suppress views different to theirs. That's a very good point. It's a dangerous path. Leave me to decide what is right or wrong, says Paul in Aberdeenshire. I do get that, which is why I was uncomfortable with the Trump ban. But I think there's a big difference between people having their own opinions and people having their own facts. And the anti-vaxxer lot have their own facts, and you're not entitled to that. That's where it becomes dangerous. 0344 499 1000. Let's just chew this over, because there's a lot of information out there that shouldn't be out there. And it is dangerous, and some of it is offensive and racist, and it overlaps into other parts of the Venn diagram as well. How do we tackle the rise of anti-vaxxers?